And good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this very special segment today on the 24th day of November 2021. Well, looking outside the window today, it's again another glorious day here in Brisbane, where the temperature is 23 degrees and it's partly cloudy, meaning it's not cloudy, but there is a bit of a cloud about. It's not bright sunny as normally is in Brisbane. But it's again a beautiful day looking out here from our studios. Well, right now today we have lots to get through. So we have this news segment together with the Daily India Report brought to you by the courtesy of PIO TV and presented by Ankita. And then we will have at 10 a.m. the weekly real estate update with Usha Chandra, and there's lots to be talked about in that segment as well. That will be coming up at 10. But first of all, let's get into the news in this segment and take a look at what's making news. Well, first of all, we'll go to Northern Territory. Everyone's talking about the outbreak and the cases that's there. So look, the whole of Australia is one. So it's very hard to break, that barrier and saying that we will contain this COVID. Well, in the very beginning, there was a national approach. And to me, that's my personal thoughts, everyone's entitled to their own thoughts and you can differ. But the thinking was that, if we had handled it in that manner throughout, right, we are all in this together, let's have a natural approach, meaning we should have closed our international borders because it was all coming from outside. So it should have been very controlled and very restrictive in all the overseas flights. And the whole of Australia treated as one. Left the local, interstate travel and all those things happen. Because that way it would have spread, it will spread to the community, but contained within whole of Australia. And we would have all tackled it in one. So rather than all these fights over the borders, the border patrols and all that, how much time and money and resources has gone into that, just policing those border controls, having that checkpoints and all that. So that has been lots of funds and money that have been spent in that. And of course, there have been people who have been poor people trying to sneak through because they want to see their relatives or whatever the reason may be. Whatever the reason may be, they were compelled to a situation where they had to sneak in. Many might have sneaked through and many got caught. So all of this would have been avoided if it was just one national approach. To me, that's a logical way, but again, then that's my thought. And of course, we have all the different states and territories. Then we have the different parties as well. So politics plays a little bit of a role in there as well. Right now, let's go to that report to Northern Territory.
There were 3 cases of COVID-19 recorded in the Northern Territory in the last 24 hours, bringing the cluster to a total of 40 cases. The first case is a man in his 40s who was identified as a close contact last Monday the 15th. He tested negative twice last week while at the Centre for National Resilience, but has since tested positive. He had received 1 dose of the vaccine. The second case is a woman in her 20s from the Binjari community. She was taken to the Katherine Hospital yesterday with symptoms where she tested positive. She is unvaccinated. She is now at the Centre for National Resilience. The third case today is an infant from Robertson River who tested positive while in the Centre for National Resilience. He's a child of an earlier positive case. He's been transferred to Royal Darwin Hospital for care. I also need to provide you some details, more details, of the second case from yesterday that came through late, the man in his 60s. He works for the Director of Public Prosecutions in Katherine. He works in our courts. He is fully vaccinated. We are still doing our investigations and interviews with him, but we believe he is a close contact or a contact from the Captain Jack's Fish and Chips shop from last Monday. This is another reminder of how important it is to check the exposure sites because you can absolutely catch COVID at an exposure site. The virus in Katherine has not just been transmitted within households, it's been transmitted in the community. It's also a reminder that this virus can take a while to incubate for some people. At this stage, Katherine will have to be in some form of lockdown or lockout until the 4th of December to the end of next week. That doesn't mean the whole period will be a lockdown. We will transition to a lockout at some point. I cannot give you any more comfort on when that will be yet. I know this feels a bit never-ending, but every day we know more. With every test, we know more. So keep doing what you are doing, and we will get there.
We keep doing what we really need to do, we will get there, but from no cases to now 4 cases there, and it is concerning to see that it might be some form of a lockdown, not completely lockout. So we will wait and see. Well, right now, someone whom we haven't seen for quite some time, and this is our former Premier, Anna Bligh. And of course, as you know, I had the pleasure of accompanying her on the Tri-Nation delegation on her first trip to India. I was chosen to be on the delegation with her. We went to India, China, and Japan. But right now, she's into banking industry, and all those kind of things that she does. Well, here is a report from her where she talks about the digital disruption.
If you just think back to early 2020, when we didn't know as much about COVID as we know now, merchants right across the country, small businesses, large businesses, all started to stop taking cash for purchases because they were worried that it might be a source of transmission of the disease. So suddenly people who hadn't never used tap and go started to do so in unprecedented numbers. And those people haven't gone back to cash. Once they've experienced the ease and convenience of tap and go, they've stayed with that technology. Similarly, we've seen more and more Australians move their debit transaction or credit transaction cards onto a digital wallet. I think it's 1 in 3 Australians now who have a smartphone are routinely using a digital wallet. That's been a massive increase in just the last 12 to 18 months. We're also seeing platforms such as Zoom and Teams now being used for credit assessments to get a housing loan, for example. So major banks in March last year, many of them had never written a home loan using a platform like that. I know at least one major bank where 50% of all of their home loans in September were done using that digital platform. So whether it's that or the emergence of new business models such as buy now, pay later, it's a very fast-moving and very disrupted space right now.
Well, Anna, we've seen huge technological disruption, particularly with the introduction and uptake of blockchain technologies with cryptocurrencies, etc. What future do these digital assets have?
I think it's a very brave person who predicts the future of what banking will look like even in 2 or 3 years' time. I think if you think back 3 years ago, for most of us it was impossible to imagine that we would be paying for almost everything using our mobile phones. It's a rapidly accelerating pace of change. Even the idea of what money is, when you start thinking about cryptocurrency, for example, is one that is changing. But what it does bring, while it brings all that convenience and all that efficiency and all that speed, it also brings new obligations on banks to continue to invest in the safety and security of these platforms. Customers, they want ease, they want comfort, they want speed with all of these channels, but they also want safety, security and privacy protections. So this is a big area of investment for banks, and what I can say is that right now, most of our banks are starting to look more like tech companies. They're employing probably more coders than they are tellers, and that's a trend that's set to continue well into the future.
Well, on security and regulation, the ASIC chair has urged investors to be careful about investing in crypto assets, admitting that the regulator is powerless to intervene at this stage. And then on the other hand, you've got the CBA chief saying one of the biggest risks banks face when it comes to cryptos is being left out. Where do you sit?
It's always a challenge when you're experiencing rapid change for governments and regulators to keep up and make sure that the regulatory framework is fit for purpose. There's no doubt that there are now assets being traded in the community here in Australia, crypto assets that are beyond the regulatory reach of existing regulatory powers. In the long term, that's something that governments are going to have to address.
Well, when you look at what's going on with respect to technology, do you think the traditional banking model under which we operate now can coexist or even exist when you look at how decentralised finance is developing?
I don't think banking is going to look the same in 3 years' time, 5 years' time or 10 years' time. When we think about what a traditional model might be, I would expect that many existing banks are going to literally have to morph into something else. There will still be, I think, a very high customer demand for the ability to talk face to face with a real person when you're making some of the biggest life decisions you'll make, such as getting a home loan. But as we already see, customers are voting with their feet. They are jumping into digital channels, and our banks are, as a result, investing more and more in those channels and less in some of the traditional areas that we might think of when we think of a bank. I think when most Australians think of a bank, they think of a building. Increasingly, a bank is just a channel, just an app in your mobile phone.
Anna Bligh, thanks.
Of course, the bank now is nothing more than an app on your phone. Well, that's the way things are going. Well, when you look at the things, these days there are so many things that are processed digitally, home loan applications, as she was mentioning. So many times it's better because, it takes out all those laborious tasks of getting everything together, going to the bank, sitting down with someone, going through all the paperwork, finding out this is missing and that's missing. Now you do it online and a submission can be parked, meaning that, all right, save and continue later, or save and come back to it, and then come back to it and go through. And it's a process. The only thing is there sometimes when you're sitting and having an interview face to face, you pick up the body language, and if it's going to be a bad loan or thing, you can sort of see that, pick it up. It's very hard. Someone very clever with computers and other things always works their way around the submissions and they become very successful in getting their loans through. But that is all the sign of times and the way and the times that we live in. But it was wonderful and good to see Anna Bligh on the show after a long, long time. Well, right now, Eastern Australia is bracing for wild weather.
During La Nina events, the Western Pacific becomes a lot warmer. So ocean temperatures to the north of Australia are warm, and because of that, we get increased evaporation into the atmosphere, and that leads to a moisture-laden atmosphere, and that generally brings us much heavier rains during our summertime.
And as I said, this is only affecting certain parts of the country. Which areas are most susceptible?
Yeah, so the states most susceptible to these increased rains are the eastern states, so Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria, maybe even Tasmania, but particularly the northeast. We see, for example, during La Nina years, an earlier wet season to the north. And so we've already seen that this year. So the onset of the monsoon, if you like, to the north is earlier. And generally cooler temperatures and increased rainfall. And so risks of bushfire, for example, are dampened. That's the good news of having a La Nina. And obviously any drought regions may get drought relief. The downside is sometimes these events can give us intense rainfall and intense flooding events.
So we're talking about extreme weather here. This is not just about a cooler summer. We're talking about extreme weather that can be potentially very damaging.
Yeah, no, we do see a greater incidence, greater frequency of flooding events during La Nina events. It's not to say we'll get one for sure. The atmosphere has some randomness to it, and so we do our best. The Bureau of Meteorology does its best to forecast the seasonal rainfall, and they know that a La Nina is upon us. And so that does skew the odds of high rains and cooler summer temperatures for those eastern states. It skews a greater chance of these catastrophic flooding events like Brisbane saw a couple of in 2010, 2011. And so we know, bushfire incidents and heat waves, they're less likely to occur, but on the downside, flooding rain events and also tropical cyclones. We tend to see more tropical cyclones form in the Coral Sea, in particular, during these La Nina events.
More cyclones and potentially more severe cyclones as well?
The severity is set by the temperature. So once a cyclone forms, yes, the temperatures in the Coral Sea tend to be warmer during La Nina. So we tend to get more cyclones, greater frequency, but also when they come along, they do tend to be more intense because of that warmer ocean temperatures. I mean, cyclones only form during summer, and if we warm the climate system as we are under global warming, but also for this year it will be warmer due to La Nina, that does tend to bring increased severity to the tropical cyclones.
You mentioned the lower risk of bushfires and heat waves. It doesn't say that it eliminates them altogether, so people still do need to be prepared for those traditional El Nino summer events potentially, don't they?
Absolutely. I mean, it's just all about skewing the chances for those events to be lower. The last big bushfire season was horrendous and catastrophic for Australia in 2019, 2020. We've had a weaker La Nina the following summer, and then this year it'll be a double La Nina, so 2 years in a row. We will tend to see regrowth of the forests in these La Nina years. Of course, that means more fuel down the track. And one of the things we're concerned about under global warming is that the number of neutral years, that number is expected to decrease. And what I mean by that is we'll have more years that are either El Ninos or La Ninas and less respite from those two extremes.
The two parts of the equation. One is that there's a lot of chances of rain, which we will going to get under that effect, but it sort of diminishes the chances of bushfires, which is a good part as well. So, you can't have it both. So, well, we'll wait and see. Well, right now, the another area where there's storms and very turbulent ones is the coalition.
Clearly, we lost in the Senate yesterday, but the fight for us is not over.
Threat still holds. What does threat still hold? Well, yes, at this stage, yes, okay.
We're getting a taste of the brutal reality of federal politics as 2021 draws to a close. Yesterday, 5 coalition senators voted against the government and with One Nation to try to force the federal government to overturn state vaccine mandates. But things were only looking grimmer for the PM today in the wake of the coalition party room meeting.
Your government says that they can't unpick state vaccine mandates. Have you been told that by the Prime Minister?
There's an argument there, but I disagree with that.
At least 2 coalition senators and an MP have effectively stopped the government being able to pass any contentious legislation for this last sitting fortnight of the Parliament, declaring they will vote against their own government unless it does something about state vaccine mandates.
Well, we got 2 pieces of key legislation through the Senate last night, one on protecting critical infrastructure from cyber, the other one on terrorism.
There is now also a simmering anger with the PM across a divided party room. Today, MPs and senators were briefed by Attorney General Michaelia Cash on one of the few pieces of legislation Scott Morrison actually wants to get past this Parliament, the Religious Discrimination Bill. Note the wording here. The party room was verbally briefed. It didn't see the very contentious legislation before it voted on it. The Prime Minister is expected to personally table the bill in Parliament later this week, emphasising his personal commitment to it. But the party room agreed today that the bill will be referred directly to a Senate inquiry, and, as both supporters and opponents of the bill freely admit, that means it will never be seen again before the federal election. The other really contentious piece of legislation, which will require voters to produce ID before voting, is already before a Senate committee and, as a result, is also not looking all that likely to pass before the election.
They're not doing whistleblowers, they're not doing anything about climate change, they're not doing anything about all of the issues that are important to Australians. Instead, they put this bill up and I won't be supporting it.
There's something else that the government doesn't seem too keen to move through Parliament, a National Integrity Commission, despite the fact it was another election promise.
Thank you, Mr President. I seek leave to move a motion relating to the consideration of the Australian Federal Integrity Commission Bill 2021 as circulated. And the Australian public have been waiting for this. So there is now urgency. There is urgency in that we have to basically force the government to comply with their promise, their own promise.
There being 25 ayes and 25 noes, the matter is resolved in the negative.
With many senators still absent from the chamber because of COVID rules, the government survived a vote in the Senate against a move to bring on debate about a national anti-corruption body. But these are not the only signs of a dysfunctional Parliament. There are delays to other legislation with real-world consequences, including one causing serious financial uncertainty for around $400 million worth of television productions, financed on the back of subsidies promised in September last year and due to start on July 1. A continuing campaign by Senator Rex Patrick to remove an exemption from corporate reporting requirements for some of Australia's largest companies and richest families means he keeps amending Treasury bills to get rid of the exemption. Apparently determined not to see the exemption removed, the government has repeatedly delayed debating such bills, and that's causing a big headache for the TV industry just now. And it's not just...
And of course, that is a lot of a concern that they have the dysfunctional parliament where the members are voting against their own party, against their own government. But then, of course, there is that cause of the vaccine and that the test and the cost of that, which has become a bit of a debate, whether it's a federal or a state-based cost. Well, right now, Stephen Marshall looks at the number of applications that have been received for travel.
There have been many happy reunions in South Australia over the last 24 hours since the state reopened its borders to people from New South Wales, the ACT and Victoria. And South Australia's Premier Stephen Marshall joins us from Adelaide. Premier, good morning.
Good morning, Michael.
Red letter day for your state.
It was a fantastic day for South Australia. Joyous scenes down at the Adelaide airport. In fact, it looked like a scene from Love Actually, with family and friends being reunited, and of course a lot of people wanting to do business in South Australia coming across that border. And we could only do it because of the great work of the South Australians who went out and got that jab, and we're very grateful for that. We've still got a way to go to get to 90%, but I'm hopeful that we'll get there before the end of the year.
OK, now are you bracing yourself? Is the health system ready for the expected rise in COVID cases now the border has come down?
Yeah, there'll inevitably be some cases in South Australia, but we are taking every precaution. We're asking people to be fully vaccinated before they come in and have a test 72 hours before they come in. They don't need the result before they come in, but they need to have at least had that test within 72 hours. Some people from LGAs around the country which have got lower vaccination rates may also be asked to have a test on arrival. They just have to isolate before they have that test, but again, not until they get that test result. So look, we're taking every precaution. We've built up the resources within our health system, but now is the time to open the border, rejoin New South Wales, Victoria and the ACT, which has been cut off with pretty harsh border restrictions, but necessary border restrictions to keep our state safe.
OK, now we saw those happy sights of people driving across the land borders, people arriving at Adelaide Airport yesterday. But Premier, not everybody had a smooth experience on the show. About this time yesterday, we spoke to Ali Allison. She lives on a farming property near Broken Hill in New South Wales. She's part of an area called the Incorporated Far West of New South Wales. She was getting very frustrated. Here's a bit of what she told us.
When I looked on the Entry Check SA website on Friday night, our LGA was not listed, and that did raise some concern, but I thought perhaps we finally would have been counted in the Broken Hill LGA. It was people like me who lived in the unincorporated Far West who were unable to move.
As we know that individual cases will differ, and right now it's time to go to Daily India Report, and with that let's welcome Ankita.
Welcome to the Daily India Report that brings you glimpses of the changing India and the growing engagement of the Indian diaspora with India. In our first story, India-US set to resolve differences on market access and other trade issues. India and the United States agreed to look for ways to resolve differences on issues such as market access and digital trade at the start of a two-day visit by US Trade Representative Catherine Tai. Negotiators from both countries have struggled for more than a year to conclude a trade package as New Delhi and Washington spar over a range of issues, including tariffs. Accompanied in New Delhi by her Deputy Ambassador Sara Bianchi, Ms. Tai raised market access restrictions, high tariffs, unpredictable regulations, and restricted digital trade between the two countries. Tai told Indian officials at a dinner hosted by Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal that these are the issues where US intend to make progress will be on the top of a list during the visit. The meeting follows Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit to Washington in September. The officials agreed that the forum will help deepen the bilateral trade relationship by establishing regular contacts to resolve obstacles. US-Indian relations have grown closer, and both countries have joined with Japan and Australia in the so-called Quad Group in an effort to push back against Chinese influence in the Indo-Pacific region. India starts trial of second-generation COVID vaccine from a US company. A clinical study of the US-based Axton Biosciences second-generation COVID-19 vaccine candidate has kicked off in India. In an open-level bridging study of AKS-452, the protein subunit COVID-19 vaccine candidate, the first 100 subjects have been dosed. The AKS-452 is shelf-stable for at least 6 months in room temperatures and maintains its potency for 1 month at 37 degrees Celsius. The Drug Controller General of India has approved the open-label bridging study being conducted by Soup Heart and Diabetes Hospital and Research Centre in Nashik, along with 4 other sites in Maharashtra. Ahmedabad-based Vida Clinical Research is managing the study. The AKS-452 is a protein subunit vaccine and does not contain mRNA technology, viral vectors, or a weakened SARS-CoV-2 virus. A double-blind phase 2 and 3 study will follow with 1,500 health volunteers aged 18 and above across 12 clinical sites in 5 states across India. The vaccine has been engineered to use standard, low-cost antibody manufacturing techniques that a single production line would be capable of producing over 1 billion doses per year. Indian Air Force Group Captain Abhinandan receives Veer Chakra for downing Pak jet. The Indian government reiterated that Group Captain Abhinandan Varthaman, flying a MiG-21 fighter jet, had shot down Pakistan's F-16 aircraft in an air duel on February 27, 2019, a day after the Balakot airstrike. He was awarded Veer Chakra by President Ramnath Kovind during an investiture ceremony at Rashtrapati Bhavan. COVID protocols delayed the physical ceremony. Abhinandan was part of the Srinagar-based 51 Squadron and had flown to thwart an aerial attack launched by the Pakistanis on February 27, 2019. The citation made it official that Veer Chakra has conferred on him for downing an F-16 jet, among other acts of bravery, including his capture after ejecting over Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. The Balakot airstrike was carried out against the terror camps at Balakot of Pakistan's Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province in a reply to the deadly Pulwama attack that claimed the lives of 40 Central Reserve Police Force personnel. It was the first aerial assault carried out by India and Pakistan after the 1971 India-Pakistan War. Code-named Operation Bandar, the airstrike was conducted by the 7th and 9th Squadrons of the Indian Air Force. After the strike, over 24 fighter planes, including F-16s, left Pakistani bases aiming to hit the Indian military installations. But the Indian Air Force, in anticipation of such an attack, was ready and an aerial dogfight ensued. It ended with Wing Commander Varthaman shooting down an F-16 fighter plane of Pakistan. Varthaman exited safely but was captured. Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan had announced the capture, but India demanded and got his unconditional and safe return. India, Japan working on the release of oil stocks after US request. India and Japan are working on ways to release national reserves of crude oil in tandem with the United States and other major economies to dampen prices. US President Joe Biden has asked China, India, South Korea and Japan for a coordinated oil stocks release as US gasoline prices have soared and his approval ratings plummeted ahead of next year's midterm congressional elections. The request came after the US government was unable to persuade OPEC Plus to pump more oil, with major producers arguing the world was not short of crude. Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida signaled his readiness to release stocks over the weekend. Indian government sources said they were holding consultations with the United States on the release of oil from strategic reserves. Japan, the world's 4th biggest oil buyer, is restricted on how it can act with its reserves, made up of both private and public stocks, which typically can only be used in times of shortage. Japanese officials are also looking at private stocks that are part of the national reserve, which some advisors argue can be released without restrictions, a second source said. Japanese oil companies' reserves have been tapped during the 1991 Gulf War and following the 2011 earthquake and tsunami disasters. Japanese private companies, including refiners, hold about 175 million barrels of crude and oil products as part of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, enough for around 90 days consumption, according to state agency JOGMEC, also exceeding the minimum 70 days requirement. India holds about 26.5 million barrels of oil in the SPR. India may utilize only half of the number of vaccines produced in December. India is likely to have a large surplus of COVID vaccines by December end, as 15.63 crore doses are estimated to be required in the month for the adult population, whereas production capacities are rising steadily. At least 31 crore doses of COVID vaccines are likely to be produced in December, almost 4 times the 7.9 crore doses made in May, indicating the surge in production. With a high coverage of the first dose and scheduled administration of the second dose after a prescribed gap, the local requirement of jabs has reduced sharply in November. Around 10.4 crore doses have been given so far, while 21.64 crore unused doses were available with the states and UTs. India plans to maximize utilization of available stocks by end of this month to aim for 100% first dose coverage and jabs for those who are due for the second shot after the prescribed interval. A total of over 28 crore doses were produced during the current month till November 19th. Of this, Covishield accounts for 22.3 crore, whereas the rest 5.6 crore is of Covaxin. While the centre supplied 15.8 crore doses to states and union territories, the private sector procured just about 36,200 doses during the month, official data till November 19th show. While around 30 crore doses are estimated to be procured by the government by the end of this month, some of it will be exported. A total of around 117.6 crore doses have been administered till November 22nd. While around 82% of the adult population has received at least first dose, nearly 43% are now fully vaccinated with both doses of the vaccines. Fifth East Asia Summit Conference on Maritime Security Cooperation in Kolkata. The 5th East Asia Summit EAS Conference on Maritime Security Cooperation will be held in Kolkata on 23rd and 24th November. The event is being organized by India in partnership with Australia.
Right now,
Apart from the two governments, organizers include the ASEAN India Centre at Research and Information System for developing countries in collaboration with the National Maritime Foundation of Australia and the Research Centre for East and Northeast Regional Studies, Kolkata. The Indian government will be represented by Riva Ganguly Das, Secretary in the Ministry of External Affairs. During the conference, experts from both government and academia from the participating countries will deliberate upon various aspects of maritime security cooperation under 4 thematic sessions. These are maritime security, resource and information sharing, science and technology cooperation, and pandemic and disaster risk reduction and management. The event will conclude with a panel discussion on the way forward. Kartik Aaryan impresses with his avatar.
Ladies and gentlemen, that's about all we have time for you in this segment. Don't forget that we are back here at 10 a.m. with the real estate update with Usha Chandra. Until that time, it's goodbye from us.